All right, here we are on a Buffalo Football Tuesday. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you, and pleased to be joined now by ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky, who was on the call last night with Louis Riddick and Chris Fowler. And Dan Orlovsky's appearances on One Bills Live are presented by Caesars Sportsbook, an official mobile sports betting partner of the Buffalo Bills. Well, Dan, you were here. You experienced it. You lived it. It was outright domination. And I'll be the first to admit that some of what Jacksonville did, especially defensively, played right into the hands of Josh Allen, which is where I'd like to begin here, because I am absolutely stupefied as to why Ryan Nielsen, who I know is a man cover caller by trade, why did he stick with it so long? I mean, I saw you at halftime. I said, how much longer is this guy going to keep making man coverage calls against Josh Allen, who for years has sliced and diced opponents when they give him man coverage? It stupefied me.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Nielsen, and I believe he's a really good coach. You know, Chris Fowler asked me on the broadcast last night. He was like, all right, can Atlanta, that's where he was last year, can Jacksonville get a stop? And I said, not if they keep playing man. And, you know, to your point, that became the main issue. I think my answer is it's not an easy offense to play against right now. You know, and the simple version is because of the offensive line, and because Joe Brady has made a commitment to run the football and then they do it well, it's tough to just play them in shell unless you have outstanding linebackers and your front four you totally believe can stop the run in that capacity. And I don't think Jacksonville believes that. And so that's why they just kept dropping down that safety and trying to put an extra body down near the football. And also it was a little bit because, you know, like I thought Joe did a great job of, and this is why football sometimes is not as complicated as we make it. Like the Keon Coleman touchdown, he puts a sixth offensive lineman on the field. Okay, well, as a coordinator, when you're watching over there and you're saying six offensive linemen, you're thinking, all right, you know, they're more than likely going to run the football. So you're making a defensive call, playing the assumption game or playing the percentages. Also, when you run the football well, you're going to get single high safety more often than maybe you anticipate or that you should, because defenses want to try to make you one-dimensional. That was at least a on paper goal for Jacksonville. And so I think there's part of it is, you know, going back throughout the offseason, this is a very difficult defense or offense to just match up against right now.
And, you know, we've seen flashes of play from Josh throughout his career. The guy goes off, we call him a unicorn a minute, and the guy does stuff nobody else does. Big athlete, he runs, he hurdles people. He's done that a lot throughout his career. But now with the Joe Brady offense and with these guys, I don't want to make it like they're just guys. Shakir, Kincaid, Cook, Coleman, Samuel, okay, all those guys.
Yeah.
It's the thing that makes this year way different, because Josh is still doing a lot, is how easy it looks. Now, certainly the Jacksonville's got some problems, and they did some stuff. But man, oh man, it just looks like the Bills never really broke a sweat in this game. And even last week when they hung all those points on the Dolphins, they just don't feel like they flexed a little. Now, last night maybe they did. They flexed a little. But man, oh man, I think the striking thing about it is how easy it looks for Josh Allen so far in the 2024 season.
Yeah, Steve, I'd say this, you know, what they've done offensively under Joe is they've taken the simple and presented it in a complicated manner. And they're not Joe didn't make new plays. You know, it's not like they're inventing football or reinventing it. He's figured out the things that they're really good at it. And it's not 4 plays. It is a gamut of plays. And he's just making them look super complicated by all the different personnels. The Keon Coleman touchdown, I'll go back to it. It's a perfect example. It's a play that's been around football forever. He just presented it in a certain way with a 6 offensive lineman and a tight end. I don't know, sometimes did you guys see last night that they took the 6th offensive lineman, Anderson, and they brought, you know, instead of putting in him at like a traditional tight end formation and the tight end outside of him, they'd have Dawson lined up as the tight end and then him as a wing off of him. And then they would just collapse.
Right.
They've even motioned him sometimes, Dan.
Yeah, so you're just taking this stuff and kind of it's a little Shanahan-like. So that's part of it, and I think that's allowed them to play very fast. I also think, I made the comment last night, that's the best half of football I've ever seen Josh play, and Kansas City playoff. And Chris, I saw you and you said, man, the New England half. The reason I kind of made that comment, and I still believe it, is one, there was a ton of control at the line of scrimmage with him. Let me make sure everyone understands all the handling of all those movements and motions. That's a lot. You got to make sure that you get set and this person moves and that person moves and you're not getting penalties. And I also think the ball placement on some of the throws was remarkable. I mean, this throw to Kincaid is absolutely I mean, it's 6 feet, 7 feet off the ground. And if he doesn't catch it with his hands, his face mask is going to catch it. The Shakir touchdown, it's perfectly thrown. The Keon Coleman touchdown, it's perfectly thrown. Again, these are easy catches.
How about Ty Johnson rolling to the left?
That throw is so ridiculous because he moves to his left and then it's just a flick of the wrist. And so, that Shakir throw, if that's here on the hip, it's a tackle and, first down, but not a touchdown. So I think that was just really, really the most impressive element of specifically what Josh did.
Yeah. With respect to Josh, we were kind of discussing this a little bit. I think it might be a little too early to pass judgment on it, but I don't know what it is, because I always have felt that Josh has had a high football IQ, but every so often, Sugar High Josh shows up, and there are some ill-advised decisions. Last year, week 1, MetLife Stadium, we saw it. Even in week 18 last year against Miami.
Sure.
2 throws, they were arm punts, but 2 throws into the end zone that were a little ill-advised. Granted, one was on 4th down. I don't know what it is, but there was a play last night. He thought for a half a second about throwing a 40-yard rope to the end zone on a low percentage play, and he checks it down instead to Cook, and it goes for 15 yards. And my eyes opened up really big, and I said, oh, my gosh, that was a Mahomes-like decision right there that he just made on the check down to Cook. It's a small sample, but I'm wondering if we're seeing a maturation of Josh with that decision-making that makes him even more consistent, which maybe for defensive coordinators is downright scary.
Yeah, I absolutely think you are. It sounds like you are as well when you sit there and you talk with him and you hear him kind of share how he's feeling in the offense. And then, Chris, I don't know which one of you guys rattled off the names. I'll go back to 2 years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, sitting with Brandon Beane and talking about, kind of where Josh, at least in that moment, they were hoping that Josh was going to get kind of where he sits right now. And Brandon said, it's my job that I have to put enough people around him that he feels okay with making some of those decisions. That if you do check the ball down, that there's a person there worthy of checking the ball down to, and that you can go get 12 or 15 yards. And when you rattle off the names, it's the sum is greater than the individual part. It reminds me a little bit of the year in 2017 when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. There wasn't this 1,000-yard receiver or this superstar, that one person. It was they got a Kincaid, and then they got a Knox, and then they got a Shakir, and then they got an MVS, and they got a Samuel, and then they got a Cook, and then they got a Matt Collins, and then they got I'm probably forgetting somebody else. It's Keon Coleman. If on NFL Live, we're going to talk about the Bills offense today. And one of the things I'm going to say is, if you don't have 5 or 6 people on your defense that you unequivocally believe can match up, you can't stop them.
Yeah.
You got it. You got to have 6 guys that can cover.
Yeah, and you talk about the way the pressure that has put on opposing offenses. The Bills are, they score on 5 possessions in the first half, and the Bills defense then, because of that, the Bills defense faces 8 fourth down tries by Jacksonville's offense. They're in go-forward mode. They got to try and catch up, and now all of a sudden you're looking at a defense that is, even before the season started, they were injured. They lost Milano. They lost Bernard early in the season.
And Taron Johnson.
Taron Johnson early in the season.
Makes no sense.
Right. Poyer and Hyde are gone. Now you've got, a 6th-round corner in Benford out there who actually plays really well. You've got backups, low-round draft picks.
6th-round safety in Hamlin.
Right.
6th-round pick in Balin Spector.
So you got all these guys. How do you, what's a defense do?
I asked them this.
What did he
Steve,
say?
I asked them this because, so one of the things that I get fascinated about with this defense is that they are so good against the run and they play with 2 safeties deep. And so, I asked Sean, I asked Bobby Babich it, and they kind of looked at me like I was an idiot. It was kind of funny because I'm like, how are you guys good at this? And they're like, well, we have to be able to defend the run half a man down or half a body down. I'm like, no, I get that. How? Like, how are you good at it? And they kind of looked at me and they, said, one, your front's got to be worthy of doing that. And, giving love to Ed and Daquan and Greg and Epinesa, like your front has to be worthy of it. 2, that the people that they've had, and DeMar kind of intimated this as well, the people that are in some of the spots playing now, it's not like they're new to the NFL. They're just new to playing time in Buffalo. Like DeMar's been there a little bit. Balin's been there a little bit. Sean McDermott said Balin hasn't lost out on competitions because he wasn't good enough. It was because of injury. And so I think part of it is, they mentioned how much time they spent in meeting with backup players and how much extra practice time is spent with those quote unquote backup players. And, the word gets thrown around so often, the culture or the standard. And I think that they have such it's not all that different than their offense right now. There's such a simplicity to the defense that everyone knows where they got to be, depending on a formation or a motion. They also know exactly where teams are going to try and attack them. And they play to that, and they know where the weakness of it is.
All right. That being said, and as exciting as 3-0 has been, it is a major step up in weight class. People can say whatever the hell they want about the 1-2 Ravens. That team's going to be there at the end of the year. They're going to get it figured out. I know they have 3 new offensive linemen they're trying to blend in. They have a new offensive line coach after the passing of Joe D'Alessandris. That requires an adjustment. And defensively, they're still trying to wrap their head around a new defensive coordinator, knowing Mike McDonald's up in Seattle now as head coach. They'll be there at the end of the year. What do the Bills have to be mindful of defensively that changes precipitously with a Derrick Henry in the backfield?
Yeah, and so this past weekend against Dallas was the first time that you watched that offense in Baltimore this year and said, that's who they are. The first couple of games, they were trying to figure out who this offense was going to be with one, like you mentioned, an offensive line that was not playing well and really struggling with the quickness of a defensive line. So that settled down a little bit. 2, were they going to be a little bit more spread-ish with Lamar, or are they going to try to be a little bit more compact and put Derrick Henry behind the quarterback and run downhill? And that's really what they got into, was that downhill run with Derrick Henry, and put Patrick Ricard, that big 300-pound weapon, onto the field. So, there's a little bit of, I still believe there's a little bit of, you got to kind of know or guess a little bit who they're going to be identity-wise. You're going to get a combination of the spread out and the motion and some of the zone read and quarterback run, or the Derrick Henry stuff. And I think part of it is you're trying to, get a feel for the game. I think Baltimore is like how defenses are going to try to play against them. They're not throwing the ball to a Mark Andrews as much as they have in the past. So it's really about Derrick Henry and how they're going to try to utilize them. And then, for Buffalo offensively, Baltimore's defense is not what it was last year. The secondary is not playing at the same level. I also don't believe that the linebackers are the same level. I think the best way you get after them is your tight ends own the middle of the field.
It'll be interesting to see, because we know there's 14 games to play, and the Bills have a lot to prove still.
Sure.
And so do the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, they're in a different division. They have had some pretty high expectations for how this was going to go. But you're right. How much of a difference has the coordinator change in Baltimore made?
A lot. I think, again, this was probably like their most consistent performance against Dallas. It got a little bit loose at the end of the game. Now, is that game flow more than, they skunked Dallas for the better part of 3 quarters. But it's definitely, I think the thing that was so great about it's not just a coordinator change. Remember, they lost Patrick Queen in Baltimore. They lost Geno Stone in Baltimore. They lost Jadeveon Clowney in Baltimore. So there's multiple pieces that are off of that defense. And their pass rush right now is sack or quarterback can go make plays with his feet. They got to find a middle ground better. So, I think Josh's pocket movement and his ability to extend, again, will be a conversation. They're not nearly as detailed as they were last year with their simulated pressures. They're bringing all those guys up at the line of scrimmage, like who's the blitzer, who's not. So they're still lacking in some of that connection that made them so difficult last year to prepare for.
Dan, before we let you go, I just have one small favor to ask. When you show up on Get Up or you show up on First Take, I need you to make a request to put a moratorium on the Bills Super Bowl window closing. I already have a moratorium on this show. I need you to at least put a request in to put a moratorium on it because it's old news. It's non-existent. Please spread the word.
I think the first thing I have to do in response to that, Chris, is just ask, what does moratorium mean?
You can't discuss this topic anymore.
Okay, that's what I figured. I just wanted to clarify. I got you. I will do, me, I will do my very best.
All right, I appreciate that. And then one last thing. Did you happen to get a look at Billy Buffalo last night?
Oh, I did. Oh, yeah, I did. My kids loved it. My kids were like, my gosh, Dad, he had your face on his shirt. So that was pretty cool, man. That place is awesome. I love going to Buffalo. I love going to that stadium. I love going around those people. I feel like I'm a lot more like those people than in some other areas that I'm a part of. So that was cool, man. That was very humbling.
Yeah, and Twitter and of course social media was quick to point out exactly where he was standing, just out the end line. Which is Orlovsky territory. Dan, wow, love you, man.
Conveniently placed.
That's right. Love you, man. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you guys.